They call it a shadow conflict, not because it is invisible, but because most of it happens quietly, out of sight, behind conversations, behind closed doors, and long before anything ever becomes public. These are not events that begin with headlines or official announcements. Instead, they begin with decisions that are made privately, often without immediate consequences, but with effects that can take months or even years to fully emerge, and sometimes those hidden decisions don't stay buried forever. In March 2026, the story returned to the public, not as speculation, but as something more concrete and difficult to ignore. There was a conviction, followed by political statements, and a claim that quickly spread across international media. Iran was accused of being behind not one, but two separate assassination plots targeting former US President Donald Trump. At first glance, the narrative seems straightforward. It feels like a clear geopolitical conflict, a direct accusation, something that can easily be understood in simple terms. But the reality behind these cases is far more layered and far more complex than it initially appears. Because what actually happened was not sudden, and it did not begin in 2026. It began years earlier with a single moment. That significantly changed the relationship between two nations and set the stage for everything that followed. In 2020, the United States carried out an airstrike that killed Iranian military commander Qasem Soleimani. This moment was immediately recognized as a major turning point. For the United States, the strike was described as a defensive action, intended to prevent future threats and protect national security interests. For Iran, however, it was viewed in a completely different way, as a direct act of aggression and a serious escalation that could not go unanswered. Following that event, tensions did not simply disappear or fade away. Instead, they shifted into a different form, less visible, less public, but still very much present beneath the surface. U.S. intelligence agencies began closely monitoring the situation, watching for any indication that retaliation might follow. This monitoring did not happen openly, but quietly and consistently over time. At the same time, Iran publicly denied any involvement in assassination planning. Official statements maintained that such actions were not being prepared or considered. And yet, over the following years, two separate criminal cases began to emerge within the United States. These cases involved different individuals, different timelines, and different methods. But despite those differences, they shared one important connection: the allegation that Donald Trump could be a target. The first of these cases begins in 2024 with a man named Asif Merchant. On the surface, nothing about his arrival in the United States immediately stood out. There were no obvious warning signs, no immediate indicators that anything unusual was taking place. However, according to prosecutors, Merchant was already involved in activities that were not visible to the public and were unfolding quietly behind the scenes. He began searching for individuals who would be willing to carry out a killing. This was not approached indirectly or cautiously. Instead, he communicated openly about his intentions. He discussed payment, outlined expectations, and engaged in conversations about logistics and execution. Step by step, he attempted to build what he believed was a functional and real operation. At a certain point, money was transferred as an advance payment. This step was significant because it indicated commitment. To Merchant, this was confirmation that the plan was progressing, that the individuals involved were serious, and that the operation was moving closer to becoming reality. However, there was a critical detail that Merchant was not aware of. The individuals he was communicating with were cooperating with law enforcement authorities. From that moment forward, every interaction changed in nature. Meetings were no longer private. Conversations were no longer secure. Instead, everything was being monitored, recorded, and documented in detail. What Merchant believed was a confidential operation was, in reality, being observed from the inside. Investigators were able to follow the development of the plan step by step as it unfolded. According to their findings, Donald Trump was among the potential targets discussed during these interactions. Despite the level of planning and communication, the operation never reached the stage of execution. No weapons were obtained, no final location was selected, and no concrete attack plan was finalized. The plan remained incomplete from beginning to end. Merchant appeared to believe that the operation would continue beyond his immediate involvement. However, that did not happen. Instead, he was arrested. In March 2026, he was convicted on charges related to terrorism and murder for hire. This conviction brought renewed attention to the case and connected it to the broader narrative that had begun to emerge publicly. But this was not the only case. Several months earlier, in November 2024, another individual had already been identified: Farhad Shakari. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, Shakari was allegedly linked to Iran's Revolutionary Guard. His role differed from that of merchant. He was not focused on direct execution. Instead, his responsibilities were centered around preparation and organization. He was tasked with organizing elements of a potential assassination plot. This included activities such as surveillance, coordination, and logistical planning. These steps are typically considered foundational in any operation, forming the structure upon which further actions could eventually be built. Once again, Donald Trump was listed as a potential target. However, just like in the first case, the process did not advance to the final stage. No attack was carried out, no execution phase was reached, everything remained at the level of preparation. Unlike Merchant, Shakari was not arrested. He remains at large and his case remains unresolved, adding another layer of uncertainty to the situation. When examining both cases together, a pattern becomes increasingly clear. Despite differences in individuals, approach, and structure, both cases involved early-stage planning. Both included elements of preparation, coordination, and intent, but in both situations the process stopped before any actual attack could occur. So what does this mean in practical terms? One individual attempted to hire people to carry out a killing, but unknowingly engaged with undercover agents from the very beginning. Another individual was accused of organizing a plot, but never moved beyond the preparation phase required to make it real. One case resulted in a conviction, the other remains open. Iran continues to deny involvement, while U.S. authorities maintain that a connection exists. Between those two positions lies what can be confirmed with certainty: two alleged plots that never reached execution, two situations that were interrupted before becoming something more serious, two operations that existed in planning but never in reality. I'm Daniel, and this was a crime story.